Right as I passed the cranberry sauce, my daughter-in-law looked up and said, "So, Catherine, will you be paying the $2,300 rent for staying in our guest room this month?" For a moment, the room went silent. Forks froze in midair. My own son didn't even look up from his plate. My heart dropped, not from the absurdity of the request, but from the coldness behind it. It was Thanksgiving, a day for family, warmth, and gratitude. And yet I was being treated like a tenant in a home where I once babysat my grandson, where I folded laundry and cooked Sunday dinners. I had given my son everything, years of sacrifice, love, support when he was at his lowest. And now I was being served a bill. Not even privately, but at the dinner table, in front of everyone. This is my story. I'm Katherine. And today, you'll hear what happened after that turkey turned cold. Welcome to Katherine Stories, where every story is real, raw, and full of heart. Before we dive deeper, tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? It warms my heart to know where these stories are reaching, and it truly helps this video find others who need it. Let's begin. I moved into their guest room 2 months ago, not by choice, but out of necessity. The apartment I had rented for over 18 years, the place I called home, where I celebrated birthdays, grieved losses, and lived quietly in peace, was sold unexpectedly. The new owner wanted to renovate and double the rent. My name wasn't on the lease anymore, just a handshake deal with the old landlord who'd known me since my husband passed. My savings weren't much. I had spent years working part-time at the local library after retirement, just to make ends meet. My pension barely stretched far enough to cover groceries and prescriptions. And now, with nowhere else to turn, I made the hardest phone call of my life. I called my son. "Come stay with us, Mom," he said without hesitation. "You'll be safe here. This is your home too." At the time, those words felt like a warm blanket after a cold rain. I remember crying quietly the first night I settled into their guest room, not from sadness, but from relief. There were dinosaur stickers on the walls from my grandson, and a quilt Sarah's mother had made folded at the end of the bed. I was grateful. I was determined not to be a burden. In the beginning, everything was peaceful. I kept the house tidy while they worked. I folded laundry, wiped little fingerprints off the sliding doors, cooked hearty dinners just like I used to. I made myself useful. And every Friday, I picked up my grandson from kindergarten, and we'd read books together on the couch until his parents got home. He'd lean his little head on my shoulder and call me Mimi. Those moments reminded me of why I had sacrificed so much for my family. But slowly, things started to shift. It began with the pantry. I went to grab a can of beans one day and found the doors padlocked. Inside, everything was labeled in bold black marker, "For school lunches only, Sarah's snacks, and do not touch." I asked Sarah about it gently. She laughed it off and said, "Oh, we're just trying to be more organized." Then came the laundry rules. No loads after 6 p.m. Catherine, the electricity spikes at night. The washer is delicate, so please don't wash towels. They get heavy. I smiled and nodded. Of course. It's their home, their space. I didn't want to cause tension. But soon, it wasn't about appliances or pantry shelves. It was the way she looked at me when I made a second cup of tea. The way she sighed when I turned the living room lights on at dusk. Little comments started slipping into casual conversation. "Wow, our water bill doubled last month. Gas prices are insane. I mean, we're feeding 3 adults and a kid now." And then, one afternoon, while I was peeling apples for a pie, she said quietly behind me, "Maybe we should start charging rent. Nothing's free in life." I froze, not because I hadn't expected it, but because she said it so calmly, like it was a logical next step, like I was just another bill to be accounted for. I didn't respond. I just smiled gently and changed the subject. I told myself she was stressed. Maybe she had a bad day at work. Maybe she was overwhelmed. But the distance between us grew. She started spending more time upstairs with the door closed. The warmth in the house shifted. I felt it in the way my grandson stopped asking me to tuck him in, because now bedtime was strictly mommy only. I felt it in how my son started coming home later, always busy, always distracted, always avoiding. I tried to remain invisible, not to intrude, not to take up space, but a woman can only shrink so far before she starts disappearing entirely. And then came Thanksgiving. The table was full. Candles flickered, laughter echoed through the house. For a moment, it felt like old times. I had made my famous cornbread scent. Uffing. My grandson wore a little paper turkey hat. I thought, maybe things were mending. Then Sarah clinked her glass. She turned to me with a bright, performative smile and said, "So, Katherine, about the guest room, are you going to pay the $2,300 rent for this month, or should we set up a payment plan?" My fork slipped from my hand. It hit the plate with a clatter that silenced the room. My son didn't even flinch. He just kept cutting into his turkey. No one looked at me. I felt my heart thudding against my ribs, my face burning with shame. I tried to speak, but no words came. She had said it, out loud in front of family and friends. She didn't ask quietly. She didn't pull me aside. She turned my motherhood, my years of sacrifice, into a transaction. She turned my love into a bill, a $2,300 invoice for existing. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about money. It was about power, control, erasure. What they didn't know was that I hadn't just lost my apartment. They were about to lose my silence. That night, after everyone left and the house had gone quiet, I lingered in the kitchen longer than usual, rinsing dishes, drying pans, wiping counters that were already clean. I needed time. Time to gather the courage to ask the question I already feared the answer to. Finally, when Sarah went upstairs and I heard the bedroom door click shut, I turned to my son, who was scrolling through his phone at the kitchen island. "Was she serious?" I asked softly, my voice barely carried above the hum of the dishwasher, "about the rent." He didn't look up. He kept scrolling, like if he ignored me long enough, the conversation would vanish. "She's just feeling pressure," he said eventually. "You know, the mortgage, daycare, groceries, everything's expensive right now. We could really use the help." I stared at him. My son, the same boy I had stayed up nights for when he had asthma attacks, the same young man I drove across state lines to bring home when he dropped out of college and didn't want to tell anyone, the one I fed, clothed, loved, prayed for. "And you think it's reasonable?" I asked, my voice trembling, "to charge your own mother $2,300 to sleep in a guest room?" He shrugged, a shrug, not even a sigh, not even discomfort. "Maybe it's time to think about assisted living," he mumbled. "You'd have more privacy, your own space." My throat tightened. The walls around me blurred. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I realized something I wasn't ready for. He had already let me go. Maybe not with anger, maybe not with cruelty, but he had. In his mind, I no longer fit into the puzzle of his life. I was the leftover piece, the one that didn't quite belong. I said nothing more. I walked slowly to my room and shut the door. I sat on the edge of the bed, hands in my lap, and stared at the wall for hours. I didn't cry. I was past crying. I just tried to make sense of it all. How did we go from bedtime stories and scraped knees to eviction notices and rent demands? How does a mother become an outsider in the life she helped build? And then, somewhere around 3 a.m., it came to me. A memory. A dusty conversation from nearly a decade ago. The house. When my son and Sarah had first found it, they were over the moon, but their credit wasn't strong enough. They were newly married with student loans barely scraping by. They needed someone with a better credit history to co-sign. I had said yes immediately. Of course I did. It was for their future. For my grandson. At the time, it wasn't even a second thought. Just a signature. A mother's gift. I hadn't thought about it in years. I assumed they had refinanced or updated the paperwork. But now, staring at the ceiling in the dark, I wasn't so sure. The next morning, I took the bus to the county clerk's office downtown. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't want to tip my hand just yet. The clerk was a kind young woman, probably not much older than my grandson's future self. I filled out a request form, gave her the address, and waited quietly in the corner with my hands folded like I was praying. 15 minutes later, she handed me a printout. I scanned the page slowly, line by line, and there it was, my name, still on the deed, still legally listed as co-owner of the house. I blinked. I read it again. I wasn't a guest. I wasn't a tenant. I wasn't someone occupying space at their mercy. I owned this house, or at least part of it. They couldn't charge me rent. They couldn't evict me. They couldn't throw me away like yesterday's mail. I folded the paper and placed it gently in my purse, right beside my old library card and a worn photo of my husband. And as I left that building and stepped into the sun, something in me shifted. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was a woman who had been pushed too far and who was finally ready to stand her ground. What they didn't know was that I had never wanted power. I had only ever wanted family. But now that they had mistaken my silence for weakness, they were about to see who I really was. My name was still on the deed. It stared back at me in black and white, bold and undeniable. For 10 years, I had never once thought to check. I trusted them, trusted that this home was theirs, and my place in it, when needed, would always be as family. But now, the truth carried a different weight. I wasn't just a guest. I wasn't a tenant. I was a co-owner. Yes, they had refinanced. Yes, time had passed, but no one ever removed my name. And in the eyes of the law, that meant one very simple thing. They couldn't charge me rent. They couldn't evict me. They couldn't erase me. Still, I didn't feel victorious. This wasn't a game I had wanted to win. I wasn't interested in revenge or payback or watching them squirm. All I wanted, all I had ever wanted, was to be treated with basic dignity, to be seen, heard, respected. That evening, I waited until the house was quiet. Dinner was over. The television was humming softly in the background. My grandson had gone to bed. I stepped into the living room and said, "Can we talk?" They both looked up from the couch. Sarah looked slightly annoyed, like I was about to bring up chores or ask a favor. My son, as usual lately, looked tired, or maybe just distant. I sat down across from them and placed the printed deed on the coffee table between us. "I want to be clear," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I'm not here to argue, but I need you both to understand something important." They leaned in, confused. "This house legally belongs to me too. My name is still on the deed. That means I'm not a tenant. I'm not renting a room. I'm not here on borrowed time." Sarah's face went pale. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. My son looked like the wind had been knocked out of him. He picked up the paper slowly, scanning it, then blinking. Twice. I let the silence settle. "I have never asked either of you for anything," I continued. "Not when I lost my husband. Not when I gave up my retirement to help with your down payment. Not when I moved in quietly after losing my home." My voice wavered for a moment, but I caught it. I gave up my apartment, my privacy, my independence, to be close to the people I love. I have cooked your meals, folded your laundry, kissed my grandson goodnight with love in my heart. And I have never once made you feel like you owed me something. But what I won't do, I added, more firmly now, is be humiliated in my own home. I could see Sarah's hands clenched in her lap. My son opened his mouth, but nothing came out. "So," I said, slowly rising from my chair, "you have two choices. We can split this house legally and go through the courts, or you can start treating me like your mother, not a burden." The room was heavy, the kind of heavy that comes when truth finally pierces denial. Sarah looked down. My son rubbed the back of his neck. I thought for a moment he might defend her, that he might fall back into the safety of excuses. But instead, he nodded, quietly, almost like a child again. "You're right, Mom," he said. I didn't realize it got this bad." Sarah looked at me, her eyes finally meeting mine. "I didn't know your name was on it," she said in a low voice. "I didn't mean to. Things have been tight. And I guess I took it out on you." That wasn't an apology, but it was a crack in the wall. And cracks, I've learned, are how the light gets in. The next few days were tense. We didn't talk much, but the silence was different. Not cold, just thoughtful, reflective. The kind of silence that comes before change. Sarah stopped locking the pantry. The passive comments vanished. And my son started sitting with me again in the mornings, asking about my day, making me tea, the way I used to make it for him. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't magic, but it was a start. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel invisible. I felt like someone who mattered because I had found my voice. I had reminded them, and maybe even reminded myself, that I wasn't just an old woman in the spare room. I was Katherine, a mother, a protector, and still a force to be reckoned with. The atmosphere changed after that day, not overnight, but in the small, quiet ways that matter most. Sarah avoided me at first. She wasn't hostile, just distant. She busied herself with work, kept conversations brief, and tiptoed around me like I might explode at any moment. But I didn't. I went on living, folding towels, making coffee, helping my grandson with his spelling words. I didn't press her. I didn't bring up the deed, or the rent, or that humiliating Thanksgiving moment, because sometimes the best way to heal is to stop defending yourself and let the truth settle like dust. Undeniable in the light. My son, however, changed immediately. He started checking in more. Little things, really, like making me a cup of chamomile tea before bed or asking how I was sleeping. He began coming home earlier, bringing home groceries I liked without me asking, and offering to take me to the farmer's market on Saturdays. It was like he saw me again, not just as someone who lived in the house, but as his mother. 1 week later, Sarah approached me in the kitchen. It was early morning. The sun was rising through the window, casting golden light on the countertop. I was slicing fruit for my grandson's lunchbox, something she usually did. I didn't mind. I liked those small rituals. She cleared her throat softly. "Katherine?" I turned, surprised. She looked nervous. Her hands were fidgeting. She wasn't wearing makeup, and her hair was pulled back in a messy bun. She looked human. Not the icy, composed woman who once demanded rent across the dinner table. "I just wanted to say," she began, voice low, "I didn't realize how much you'd done for us, for him, for this family." She looked down. "And I'm sorry for making you feel unwanted. That wasn't fair." It wasn't a dramatic apology. There were no tears, no dramatic hug or grand gesture, but it was honest. And in truth, I didn't need theatrics. I just needed acknowledgement. I gave her a small smile. "Thank you," I said gently. "That means more than you know." From that moment, the ice began to melt. Not instantly, but slowly and sincerely. The walls between us softened. She started including me in conversations again, asking my opinion, inviting me to help in the kitchen. One night, she even left a piece of warm pie on my nightstand with a little note, made with extra cinnamon, just how you like it. It wasn't just about pie. It was about effort, about making room again in their hearts for someone they had pushed to the edge. And no, everything isn't perfect now. There are still quiet moments where I wonder if resentment lingers in the background, but I've learned something important. I don't need their approval to validate my place in this world, because I know who I am. I am not a burden. I am not invisible. I am Katherine, a mother, a woman, a survivor, and more importantly, someone who finally remembered her own worth. Today, I still live here, in the same guest room with the same quilt folded at the foot of the bed, but everything feels different. Not because they changed, but because I did. I no longer shrink myself to make others comfortable. I no longer apologize for taking up space, and I no longer mistake silence for peace. I walk through this home, my home, with my head held high, because I am not just someone's mother-in-law, not just someone's fallback plan. I am a woman who gave her life to her family, who co-signed on their dreams when no one else would, who stepped in when things fell apart without asking for anything in return, and who finally said, enough. Because love should never come with a price tag. Respect should never have conditions. And family should never make you feel like you have to earn your place. Sometimes the strongest thing a woman can do is pull up the paperwork, not to win, not to shame, but to remind the world and herself that she belongs, always did, always will.